In front of millions of people, Joanie Lamb's world fell apart on camera. Joyce Meyer delivers a vicious bombshell that leaves Joni stunned and compels Dayar to act rashly in a surprising turn of events that no one anticipated. Years of quiet were broken. Personal conflicts burst into public shame. This goes beyond a simple breakup. A Christian media empire is completely collapsing. And at last, the truth about it all is emerging. The depth of this betrayal will astound you. Initially, Joanie Lamb appeared to be the ideal leader at first glance. She smiled with the kind of serene strength people clung to, prayed confidently, and stood gracefully in front of the cameras. Many praised her for keeping Dayar going after her husband, Marcus Lamb, passed away. She seemed to viewers as a devout woman who remained resilient during the storm. However, something was changing behind the scenes. First quietly, then without a doubt. Staff started to notice alterations inside the Dayar headquarters. Once seen as friendly and cooperative, Joni began making all of her own decisions. She had to review even the smallest items, such as graphics, guest invitations, and clothing. Individuals who used to feel like a team started to become inconspicuous. You might be transferred or excluded from important meetings if you challenged a decision or proposed an alternative. It wasn't raucous or theatrical. Though sluggish and silent, it was taking place. Longtime staff members who had previously felt like family now had to tread carefully. Discussions grew circumspect. Concepts were diluted or suppressed. Altogether, it seemed as though something else was taking the place of the mission that had brought them together, sharing the gospel and transforming lives. Preserving Joni's authority. It wasn't any better at home. Jonathan, her son, who had been by her side throughout the ministry, started to distance themselves. He had been raised in the realm of the daystars. He had faith in it. But as time went on, he began to feel more like a worker than a kid. The warmth that had characterized their connection and trust started to feel tense. There were additional arguments. People began to notice that he was missing broadcasts and public occasions. Where's Jonathan? Viewers who accustomed to see him every week began to inquire. Joni continued to attend church functions, grinning. She raised her hands while uttering the appropriate words. However, something felt strange to those who knew her well. Her eyes did not always meet her smile. The happiness was practiced. Additionally, when others attempted to speak with her, she frequently seemed to wasn't actually listening to them. Her attention was fixed on control rather than the task. Meetings behind closed doors shifted from vision to image. Rather than envisioning novel approaches to connect with people, they were consumed with anxiety over metrics, ratings, books. According to the staff, it was no longer about God's plan. It has to do with Joni's acceptance. Some of them walked away slowly. Others remained in the hopes that things would improve. The muttering increased in volume outside the building. There began to be rumors that Joni was more focused on establishing her personal brand than advancing God's kingdom. Some contributors started to wonder if their funds were being used for Joni's platform maintenance or for ministry. And those who had consistently stood up for her started to hold on. The rumors, however, weren't the most difficult aspect. It was the distance, the widening void between Joni's on-screen persona and her off-screen persona. The warmth that formerly characterized her leadership was gone, but she was still speaking, praying, and leading. And individuals were beginning to see through the gaps. Joni tried to keep her composure for a time. She stepped up her efforts to maintain control, believing that perhaps if she controlled every aspect, the unraveling would cease. However, the longer she hung on, the more objects slipped out of her grasp. Relationships deteriorated, employees felt constrained, and her bond with her own kid grew weaker every day. The gap between private reality and public image had become too great to conceal. Additionally, for the first time, individuals who had viewed Joni as unflappable began to question whether she had forgotten the goal. Was God still at the center of this? Or had Joni quietly taken center stage? The flawless image that viewers were seeing on screen was starting to break. And in the silent nooks of Dayar, behind the camera, the individuals who were aware. The truth was becoming sick of acting as though it didn't exist. For many years, Joanie Lamb and Joyce Meyer were regarded as two of the mainstays of contemporary Christian media. They prayed together on television, stood together at conferences, and helped one another during difficult times. Their audiences, who admired them as strong, devout women, were well aware of their friendship. However, when Joyce Meyer took an unexpected action, everything changed. When she did speak, it was about more than just a dispute between two well-known people. Sent shockwaves that reverberate across the religious community. Joyce had spent a lot of time observing Joni. She was extremely upset by what she observed. It wasn't about one particular instance or choice. The change was unpleasant and slow. Joni's leadership at Dayar, particularly following Marcus Lamb's passing, had long been revered by Joyce. She witnessed a woman enduring unspeakable grief while preserving her ministry and family. However, Joyce became aware of changes over time that she couldn't ignore. The Joni she had once referred to as a sister in faith was starting to behave differently. She was becoming more controlling, more guarded, and more concerned with maintaining her public persona than with carrying out the ministry's objective. Joyce initially attempted to deal with it in a quiet manner. She didn't want to cause a disturbance or go public. She wasn't like that. Rather, she grabbed the phone. In an attempt to get in touch with the lady she used to know, she called Joni late at night. She gently raised her worries, reminding her of their shared initial goal of helping others. Not platforms. However, Joni dismissed it each time Joyce brought it up. She either ended the conversation, made evasive promises, or shifted the topic. Nothing changed, and Joyce secretly started to feel increasingly powerless. Joyce, meanwhile, was hearing tales, not merely hearsay but authentic testimonies from Dayar employees, family friends, and those who had known Joni in the past. They discussed workplace dread, decisions made without prayer, and a culture that had moved from cooperation to acquiescence in silence. Those who had devoted their souls to the ministry and loved Dayar now felt like strangers. They characterized Joni as control-obsessed, unreceptive to criticism, and quick to shoo away anyone who didn't fit the mold. The more Joyce listened, the more certain she grew that something was very wrong, even though she didn't want to accept it. She prayed for months. She prayed to God for insight. She was aware that everything would change if she came out in public. Not only for her and Joni, but also for their followers, their ministries, and the Christian media community as a whole. It would be painful. It would split. And she would have to pay for it. She was aware of something far more difficult, though. She would be complicit if she said nothing. And she was incapable of accepting that. Joyce assembled a small group that day. She didn't make a media call. She didn't issue a press statement. She started talking while holding her Bible in a silent room. She didn't sound angry. It was solid, serene, and incredibly depressed. She reported her observations. She discussed Joni's change in leadership and how it appeared that the ministry was now more about appearance than faith. She talked about how it broke her heart that power had begun to take the place of purpose. She said, "I have loved Joni like a sister. However, I cannot remain silent when I witness God's creation being used as a platform for personal dominance." Those were powerful words. Despite their simplicity, they were powerful. Joni wasn't being attacked by Joyce. She was mourning for what was gone. She was clear that this had nothing to do with personal hurt or retaliation. Their shared calling needed to be safeguarded. The goal of sharing Christ's love with everyone. She emphasized to the audience that becoming a leader in God's kingdom is not about holding on to power, but also about service, humility, and sacrifice. The reaction was instantaneous. A few were taken aback. They were shocked that Joyce would criticize Joni. It was a betrayal to them. For the first time, however, many others felt noticed. Those who had previously felt voiceless while working under Joni felt as though they had been heard. Donors, former staff members, and even pastors who had previously questioned Dayar's leadership started to speak out. They told their own tales. They verified what Joyce had stated. The barrier of quiet that had shielded Joni for so long started to break down. There was backlash, of course. Joni's followers hurried to her aid. According to them, Joyce misinterpreted the circumstances. She was accused of discussing personal stuff in public. They claimed that Christians shouldn't deal with disputes in this way. Joyce, however, remained steadfast. She did not return the clap. She didn't dispute. That's all she said. Even when it hurts, the truth is essential to healing. She kept praying for Joni in the hopes that her words would be interpreted as a wake-up call rather than an attack. Christian media sources took up the topic as her message gained traction. YouTube channels, podcasts, and blogs started talking about it. Sermons from churches all around the nation made mention to the situation. It spurred further extensive discussions about responsibility, authority, and what it means to be an honest leader in the ministry. People started to pose challenging queries, not only regarding Joanie Lamb, as well as nearly all of the spiritual leaders they adhered to. Had they grown too accustomed to celebrity, or were they genuinely advancing the gospel? The ripple effect was strong inside Dayar. Staff meetings grew hostile and quiet. Audiences started requesting responses via email. Donations decreased. Participating ministries took a break. Some demanded that Joni resign. Others prayed that she would return. However, the mood had shifted. The fissures were now too large to overlook, and the appearance of perfection had vanished. Joyce, however, maintained her composure. She had no intention of ruining Joni. She was clear about that. She continued to have faith in Dayar's quest. It just shouldn't be based on control and terror, in her opinion. She didn't aim to cause division with her statements. They were intended to restore, illuminate shadowy areas, and serve as a reminder to everyone, especially those in positions of authority, that nobody is superior. Correction. More stories came to light in the weeks that followed. Others stepped forward. Previously hidden, the truth was now exposed. Additionally, even though it hurt, it made room for something better. Genuine accountability, the opportunity for genuine healing, and sincere introspection. Joyce took a risk by doing this. Although it cost her, it also served as a compelling reminder of something basic. Telling someone the truth is sometimes the most loving thing you can do for them. In a moment of confusion, Joyce's voice became a beacon of light. She shone courage to the religious community. She reminded everyone that while it may not always be pleasant to speak up, it is much worse to remain silent in order to safeguard malfunctioning systems. And she wasn't only criticizing a buddy in the process. She urged everyone in the Christian community to recall what this is what leadership is all about. Faith, humility, and truth, not control or image. The Christian community was not the only group to be shocked by Joyce Meyer's public remarks. It struck at the heart of Daystar, the ministry that was once a shining example of. Now, there was a storm that optimism, unity, and strong faith programming couldn't escape. And very immediately, the atmosphere within the Daystar building started to shift. Once a place of safety, even a family, it became icy, tense, and uncertain. For years, a lot of Daystar workers had secretly questioned whether they were the only ones experiencing discomfort. Some had experienced exclusion. Others had witnessed the dismissal of talented coworkers without cause. Many had been reluctant to speak up because they were concerned that if they ever questioned Joni's choices. But after Joyce Meyer's remarks were broadcast, everything seemed to fall apart. Now that the hush had ended, there were inquiries and repercussions everywhere. Longtime employees who had always admired Joni were suddenly divided inside the offices. They recalled the woman who prayed before all of the team's important meetings and urged them to remain focused on God's plan. They recalled how, following Marcus's death, Joni kept the network together. The idea that she might be at fault was hurtful and difficult for those folks to comprehend. Joyce's remarks, however, simultaneously evoked memories they had made an effort to ignore. Recollections of tense meetings, looks that were exchanged when someone said something incorrectly, and ideas that were abruptly put down without justification. All of a sudden, those embarrassing situations were no longer. They seemed to be signs of something more serious. Conversations started out cautiously before becoming more casual. "Have you watched the video?" One employee would mutter. "Remember that meeting from last year, when Joyce might have been mistaken?" There was a lot of ambiguity, half-finished statements, and silent conversations going on in the office. The impact of Joyce's comments was felt even by people who had never met her. The shift became apparent to the audience as well. A few of them had spent decades watching Daystar. They had joined Joni in prayer. Via the television, sent money, and shared broadcasts with loved ones. However, they were suddenly posing challenging queries in emails. Is this accurate? What's happening in the background? Is Daystar's mission still to protect or to promote the gospel? Strength? Joyce was criticized by some viewers for causing divisiveness. Others expressed their gratitude to her, stating that they had known something was wrong for a while but had never been able to articulate it. Confusion, reaction, support, and speculation erupted on social media. People were conversing, and once they got going, they couldn't stop. Suddenly, Daystar's leadership was being scrutinized. Board meetings started to get heated. It was requested that Joni provide clarification, outline the decision-making procedures, and address worries from partners and donors. Some board members vigorously defended her, claiming that the entire situation was a spiritual assault. Others advocated for accountability, audits, and transparency. Donors, networks, other churches, and partners of the ministry began to get anxious. While some openly supported Joni, most remained silent in the hopes that the situation would be resolved. Donations were paused by some. Others started searching for new networks to collaborate with. They wished to avoid becoming entangled in the midst of what was swiftly becoming a spiritual crisis in the public eye. The strain was also felt by Joni's family behind closed doors. Although her children had always played a part in Daystar, their roles felt flimsy today. Jonathan was particularly caught in the midst. After years of working closely with his mother, he was suddenly hearing worries from respected staff members who were subtly acknowledging that perhaps things had gotten out of hand. He was drawn to his mother, but he also felt obligated to uphold the integrity of the ministry his family had established. Joni's conversations with her kids became emotional. Voices arose. They cried. While nobody wanted to see Daystar fail, they also couldn't deny the widening gap between the ministry's stated identity and its actual state. The family was shattered. The ministry's foundation was starting to tremble, and the personnel was split. Fear became an everyday occurrence in the building. Quietly, several employees began packing belongings and writing pals' farewell notes. Others lowered their heads, uncertain about speaking or remaining mute. Volunteers became less frequent. In the break rooms, the excited interns were now whispering to each other. They were unsure of what they had entered. The Daystar name, originally composed of confusion, now accompanied purpose and power. Joni made an effort to continue. As usual, she went on live with a steady voice and a serene tone, but it was clear that she was under strain. Her eyes were worn out. Her once assured stance now seems contrived. She talked about prayer and faith. However, even devoted watchers sensed that something wasn't quite right. Public opinion was a tremendous burden. Joni sensed it in every email that prompted her to ask, "What's really going on?" Every headline, and every glance. Even her remaining admirers were starting to have second thoughts. They recalled the woman who had guided them through grief and loss and who had contributed to the development of an international ministry. However, the person they were seeing now appeared scared, defensive, and guarded. Joyce was not someone they wanted to believe. However, they were also unable to ignore the questions that were growing inside of them. There was fallout everywhere. Donations declined. Partnerships ended. Churches that used to broadcast Daystar messages started to silently stop doing so. Every day, the topic was reported by Christian media sites, blogs, and podcasts. What had begun as a private friendship that had soured was now a major public issue. The objective seemed to be slipping through everyone's fingers within Daystar. There was no longer any discussion of the gospel. They discussed survival, control, leadership, and damage. There was now tension, anxiety, and silent sadness in the air that had before been one of prayer and preparation. But despite everything, there was still hope. Some employees prayed for restoration at private prayer groups. Some team members started inquiring about ways to return the attention to God's work. People shared their hurt, their concerns, and their yearning for change in brief but honest moments. And something genuine started to grow once more during those times. Out of brokenness and a deep need for healing, not pride or power. The turmoil inside Daystar was about more than just one leader. It was about what happens when a ministry veers off course. The lesson about what occurs when control takes the place of calling was difficult. However, it also demonstrated who was prepared to confront reality and who continued to have faith that God could create something positive out of suffering. Would Daystar live? Remained unsure. However, one thing was evident. There was no longer silence among those within its confines. And there was at last room for transformation in that candor. For years, Joanie Lamb had stood erect in the middle of Dayar, keeping the ministry together with grace and assurance. For millions of viewers worldwide, she became the embodiment of endurance, faith, and strength following the death of her husband Marcus. However, Joni was confronted with something she had never really prepared for when the Joyce Meyer controversy erupted and the internal conflicts reached a breaking point. The chance that she might have to let go. Joni started to feel the weight of everything collapsing in the quiet hours, away from the spotlight and the cameras. She could sense the growing distance between her own family, hear the tiredness in their voices, and see the worry in the eyes of her employees. The ministry she had previously dedicated her life to no longer felt the same. Meetings were no longer about new vision or innovative ideas. They have to do with minimizing damage. Donors with challenging questions were calling, not thrilled partners. The social media comments were hurtful. The emails went deep. Longtime supporters' silence even spoke louder than words ever could. Joni was emotionally and spiritually exhausted in addition to physically. Because so long, she had battled to maintain the ministry. It was for God, for Marcus, and for the audience, she told herself. But she started to ponder in the silence of her personal time. Did she continue to lead by faith? Or was she merely attempting to live? The building was almost silent when she sat by herself in her office late one evening. She switched off the lights, allowing the gentle glow from the nearby monitors to bounce off the walls. Worship services and global mission were formerly displayed on screens, but now they felt like reminders of what was slipping via her hands. 4 days, her Bible remained unread on the desk, not because she didn't believe, but rather because she was unsure of how to handle the situation. She had begged endlessly for God to make everything right, to stop the naysayers, to bring back what had been taken away. However, the responses did not obstruct. She anticipated. When the building hummed in solitude that night, Joni opened her Bible once more. She did not turn to a particular verse. She simply dropped the papers. Psalm 46 verse 10, "Remain still and know that I am God." This time, those words struck a new chord. They didn't seem like a motivating factor to keep going. They seemed like a subliminal call to let go, to stop trying to be in charge of everything, to stop holding on to the self she had fought so hard to preserve. She gave herself permission to be honest with God and herself for the first time in a long time. She lost it. She broke down in tears that she hadn't shed in years. Tears of release, not merely of annoyance or despair. She acknowledged. She was tired of carrying it all, but she had been too scared to express it out. That perhaps backing off wasn't failure, and that she didn't want to battle any longer to cling to something that seemed meaningless. It might have been obedience. In the days that followed, Joni had to make the most difficult choice of her life. She started holding discreet meetings with her trusted advisors, top staff, and kids. She didn't attempt to control or defend the story for the first time. She paid attention. She acknowledged the mistakes she had made. She recognized the stress, the pain, the anxiety that had been ingrained in Daystar society. As she talked, her voice wavered, but it was genuine. There was only the truth, no spin or script. Many people in the room shared her tears. Unsure of how to interpret what they were hearing, others sat in quiet. Still wary of everything they had experienced, some were doubtful. But the fact that the wall was collapsing was more important. The barriers Joni had erected around herself, which prevented her from observing the harm, were approaching.